Hello, welcome to the Practical Intro to Logic and Functions section of the Become a CSS Superhero with Stylus course. Now, we're going to really start getting into some of the more complex but more powerful stuff that Stylus can do. Now, in this lesson, we'll be looking at things called conditionals and operators, and we're going to use these to apply an adjustment to your base font size conditionally. That is, only when that adjustment needs to happen. Now, you recall I mentioned earlier that as a best practice, you should leave the font size applied to the HTML element at its default. So don't go changing it to 62.5% or anything like that, because you don't want to override the user's ability to set their own preferred font size. And I also go into some of the other reasons why that's important. I mentioned earlier my course, Bomb-Proof Web Design. So if you're interested in more information on that, you can check out that course. Now, that said, there are some circumstances where you're going to need to make a little bit of a tweak to how the default text on your site actually appears. And that is if you're using a font that for whatever reason comes up noticeably larger or smaller than your typical font does at the default size. And we have an example of that here. On the right, we have a box using the Open Sans font, and that's at 16 pixels. And next to it, we have a box using the Open Sans condensed font, and that's also at 16 pixels. And yet you can see the size that they come up at is noticeably different. Now, even if you were to leave your HTML font size at its default of 16 pixels, you're probably going to find that people will have a little bit of difficulty reading a font this large. And you're also going to have some flow-on effects to your layout. You can see that the heights of the two elements are quite different. And you're actually going to be in your visitor's best interest if you do adjust that, just to normalize it, not to try and take away control from the user, but just to give them a consistent experience. And the way we're going to do that is by applying an adjustment to the body element. Now, we're going to use an M value against the body element, so that will still give you a multiple of the font size that's applied to the HTML element, which means all of the rem values will still operate in the same way as they would otherwise, but your text display is going to be at a normalized size. Now, let's have a look at it, how this would work. So we'll put a new font size in, let's say 1.2 M, for example. That's a little bit big, so we'll scale that down a little bit more. Okay, there we go, 1.1 M's. That looks about right. So we've normalized that font size. But you don't want to be having to rewrite your code every time you create a new site. So we're going to put in a little bit of a check. We're going to put in a variable to control whether or not you're going to be adjusting that body font size. And then we're going to run a test to see if this alternative font size code needs to be included or not. Now, the first step to do that is to add our new variable. And we're going to call it adjust body font size. And we'll set that to be equal to 1, because generally speaking, you're not going to want to change anything. So 1 EM will typically be the font size that you would apply to the body element. Now, instead of explicitly writing out this M value, I'm going to draw from this variable. So we know that we want the font size by default to be 1M. So we're pulling in this value of 1. However, we also need to add the M unit. So we're going to use a little function that's included in Stylus called unit. So I'll just type out unit, add some brackets, and then I will place a comma and add the unit that I want to use. So that will just turn this into 1M in the CSS that's output. Now we'll save that and I'll show you the resulting code. Okay, so then that's just taken that and turned it into font size 1M. Now if we were to adjust this variable, we would get the same effect that you just saw earlier of correcting that Open Sans condensed font size. All right, there you go. However, if you do have a font that looks perfectly fine at its normal size, then you don't want to have this extra code output. It's not necessary. Now we're going to do what's called a conditional check to see whether this code's necessary. And we know that if this value is left at 1, we don't need this code because the body font size is automatically going to be 1EM. So this is just extra that's not required. Now, the way that I'll do that is with what's called a conditional check. So a conditional check just checks on a certain condition. So I'm going to say if, that's the conditional element of what we're writing. And I want to know if adjust font size is equal to 1 or not. And this is where I'm going to use something called an operator. And there are all different types of logic that you can use through operators. Now in this case, we want one that says, that means is not equal to. So we're going to use an operator that looks like this. Exclamation mark equal. So this first little part of the operator says not, and the second part says equal. And then I'm going to put 1. So in plain English, this whole line just means if the value of adjust body font size is not equal to 1, and then you can go on and provide instructions if that condition evaluates to be true. Now, if we wanted to do the opposite, is equal, we would use 2 equal signs. But in this case, we want to know that it's not equal, because we only need this line of code if adjust body font size is not equal to 1. Now, because we only want this line to be output if we get a result of true from this conditional check here, we need to just tab indent it. Now I'll save that. And if we have a look at our CSS, now you can see there's no font size line that's been output because Stylus has seen this conditional check and it's looked up to see whether or not 1 is equal to adjust body font size. And because it found that it is equal, it hasn't proceeded. Now let's change this variable again. Now we're changing it to 1.1. When Stylus reaches this conditional check, it's going to say, if adjust body font size is not equal to 1, it's going to look up here and it's going to find this, and it's going to see that adjust body font size is not equal to 1, then it will go ahead and it will write out this code. I'll save that again. And now you can see that that has been included. And that's a very simple introductory way to look at conditionals and operators. So again, this is the conditional, and this is the operator. And there's a lot that you can do with these things, but that just gives you something you can run with and use right away. And we'll get into some more complex stuff in the following videos. And that will begin with learning about stylus functions. Now, stylus functions look a lot like stylus mix-ins, but they're not quite the same. In the next lesson, we will learn about what a stylus function can do that a stylus mix-in can't. I'll see you in the next lesson.